Hey guys, today we're going to be talking a little bit about historical thinking skills, and this is going to help us read like a historian throughout the course of the semester. The first part of the historical thinking skills is sourcing. When we're talking about sourcing, we're talking about the reliability of the author. Reliability is the factors that determine whether or not a source can be trusted. There are three main factors that help us to determine whether or not this source is reliable. The first thing is bias. Does this author have a bias one way or another? For example, if you're reading a document about apartheid and you read Nelson Mandela's document, he has a bias. He has a bias specifically against apartheid because he suffered from the injustices of apartheid. The second thing you're going to read through is background. What does this author already know? Especially this is going to come into play, especially if this is a secondary source or if the author saw the event firsthand. Was the author there? Were they at the location? What did they see? What do they already know? And the last thing that you're going to read for is the purpose. Is the purpose of this document to be an unbiased source? What is the purpose of this document and how does that relate to what we're talking about there? The questions that you might ask yourself when you're looking at sourcing is, who wrote this? What is the author's perspective? When was it written? Where was it written? Why was it written? And then is it reliable? And why or why not? Golden Hawk historians will be able to identify the author's position on the historical event, identify and evaluate the author's purpose in producing the document, hypothesize what the author will say before reading the document, and be able to evaluate the source's trustworthiness by considering bias, the background of the author, and the purpose. When you're writing about sourcing, some sentence starters that you might use would be, the author probably believes, the audience is, based on the information in the source, the author might, or this document is or is not reliable because. The second thing that you're going to be looking at is contextualization. Contextualization means to understand an event in the context of when it happened. That means taking the past, the present, and the future into consideration. For example, it's very difficult to talk about the Cold War unless you're talking about the end of World War II and the Treaty of Versailles. Some questions that you might look at is when and where was the document created? What was the different then and what was the same? And then how might the circumstances in which the document was created affect its content? And what connections can I make between this document and prior or later events? Golden Hawk historians will be able to understand how context and background information influence the content of the document and recognize that documents are products of a particular point in time. Sentence starters that you might use when you're talking about contextualization is the author might have been influenced by, this document relates to, prior to this document, or after this document was written. The third skill is corroboration. When you corroborate something, it means that you're supporting your argument with evidence. So you're finding evidence from the document that you were reading, or you have evidence from outside sources, such as your notes or something else, to help you support an argument that you make. The questions that you might ask yourself when you're thinking about corroborating evidence is, how does this document compare with others? Do the documents agree? If not, why? And what are other possible documents? And what documents might be the most reliable? Golden Hawk historians will be able to establish what is probable by comparing documents to each other, to recognize differences and similarities between documents, and establish a strong argument using evidence from prior knowledge or the documents. Some center starters you might use when you're making your argument is, the author agrees or disagrees with, these documents all agree or disagree about, another document to consider might be, or from this document it can be concluded that. The final skill that you'll be working on is close reading. When a student close reads, they're getting an intensive analysis of a text in order to come to terms with what it says, how it says it, and most importantly, what it means. It is through an annotation that most readers are going to be able to close read. When you're close reading, you're going to ask yourself questions like, what argument does the author make? What evidence does the author use? What language, words, phrases, images, or symbols does the author use to persuade the audience? And how does this document's language indicate the author's perspective? Golden Hawk historians will be able to identify the author's argument about an event, evaluate the evidence and reasoning the author uses to support their argument, and evaluate author's word choice and understand that language is used intentionally. When you're talking about what you read or analyzing a certain document, you might use some sentence starters like this. The author's word indicate, the author's argument is, the evidence supports the author's argument that. So you would include the evidence in your answer. Thanks for joining me for this video, and I'll see you in class.